Today I'm outside of Hollywood for a brand new debut, but it's not the latest and greatest action blockbuster. It's much more of a sequel, or really a part two if I'm entirely honest, because for 2025, Mitsubishi hasn't done an overhaul of their popular Outlander model. Instead, what they've done is make some slight changes and tweaks, mostly based on customer feedback. And you'll be forgiven if you don't notice it upon first glance. Most of what's changed is actually happening on that interior. So without further ado, let's go ahead and dive into what makes this a little bit different than last year's and why I think that's all positive. Changes up front are few and far between, which means the Outlander keeps its bold front end styling, which, take it or leave it, is mostly okay with me, but it's a little bit unique because not only do we get this big black center grille here, but we also have these flares either in chrome or black depending on which trim level you get. And what it ends up doing is highlighting what is already one of the largest light assemblies that I can think of here in North America, but it's also going to be, depending on the color, a little bit more obvious. If you have a darker color, then this is going to more closely match that grille, but here on the lighter end, you can see just that divide. And the divide also carries in through these lights because we have your daytime LEDs, you have your headlights LED, as well as your LED fog lights. So it's the largest version of the divorce headlight that I can think of currently. Now the changes that are made up front, as I mentioned, just a few of them. The biggest one here is going to be up in this grille section. It used to be both connected to the hood and much more textured, and in this case it's gotten much smoother and has also divorced itself from that hood. The last piece is going to be down here, just a small change in that grille opening, but overall this still very much is the Outlander front end. Unchanged from last year is going to be dimensions. So at 188 inches long, that makes this one of the most compact ways to carry more than 5 people around should you find yourself needing to do so. It doesn't mean there are no changes here to the exterior. One of the big ones is going to be this color. And a color might be small, but it is pretty nice. I'm not sure how it'll show up on camera, but this Moonstone Gray is a very blue version of gray, but definitely one that I like. The other thing we're going to see is a new trim level, and that's going to be the platinum trim, which from the outside will be distinguishable by its two-tone paint job, because that's the only way you can get a silver roof and a black exterior if that is something you're interested in. One of the other things that will set this apart is going to be the wheel options. We still have 18 standard, 20-inch optional, but instead of the blade style that we had last year, it's much more of a squared out spoke design. And I'll be honest, I think this is one of my least favorite changes on this model. Let me know if you think those last wheels were a little bit better or if this is more up your alley. The biggest change out back is going to be in the taillight design, and it's not a massive overhaul, although everything here is LED, including that amber turn signal over there. The biggest thing is it got a bit of a smoky treatment, and I think that does elevate this look just a little bit. A few key features that I like to take note of: we do have a rear wiper, we have no exhaust pipe, so things stay a little bit clean, and very minimal badging. Outlander here, your trim level there on the back, and then of course Mitsubishi here in the middle. Under the hood, the biggest change actually happens to be the hood itself. It is now disconnected from this upper grille portion, like I mentioned earlier, but it's also had to change in materials, now being made of steel, and you can definitely feel that. It also has one of my least favorite support rod designs, but once that is in place, what it exposes here is our 2.5 liter 4-cylinder engine, putting out 181 horsepower and 181 pound-feet of torque. We haven't gotten any revised fuel economy numbers, so I expect those will remain the same. For reference, the 2-wheel drive model came out at 27 combined, and the all-wheel drive model came in at 26. Luckily, these seats are a carryover from last year's model, meaning they remain comfortable and supportive. Also here on the premium trim come with an 8-way power adjustment for the driver, 2-way lumbar support, 2-position memory settings, but we still don't have a power tilt and telescopic steering wheel. This one's manual, but if there's something that's manual, I'd rather it be the steering wheel. If we open up the back, you'll see that with the third row up, we don't end up with a ton of storage space. I'll grab one of my bags here. We are still going to be able to fit it in, well, some way, but obviously you're going to be sacrificing your cargo capacity for people capacity. But I don't think it's going to be a big issue. Most folks looking at this are not going to consider using this every single day, and that's a good thing, because if you are taking these up and down, one thing you may notice, these seem a little bit short. That's because the headrest is going to be located here under the underfloor, which means that you have to manually take them in and out whenever you do move those, but it also means that the underfloor is not designed for extra storage. But that's okay, because what we get here is a ton of storage. When you fold these seats down, as I suspect they will be most of the time, the space here is large and in charge. It's not just a big space, but it's nice, it's square, it's tall, so you can get a lot of stuff in here if you have those seats down. And obviously you can do a 50-50 there if you want to use one extra person and still have room for luggage. In that middle row, you may be able to see from here, it's actually a 40-20-40 split, so you can fit longer items through the center and still keep your 2 outboard seats. So really this is going to be a people practical vehicle Cargo practical vehicle. Obviously in the smaller size, we have to get a little bit creative, and Mitsubishi has definitely done that. Onto the interior, which has always been a strong point here in the Outlander, and as you can see, it comes in a new color. This is the brick brown, and we still keep the quilted patterns here in the top end trims. Now, where it's brown, you'll see it's going to be also soft touch, so that's going to be on the upper part of the door, down there obviously in the armrest. That black plastic up there is going to be a little bit harder, but as we move over to the dashboard, that's going to remain fairly soft touch. So a nice piece. The strong horizontal line that runs through this vehicle definitely remains, but we do get that brown throughout. Now, before I get too far, the big change here on the interior is going to be the provider of your sound. So whether you are in the base trim or one of these higher end trims, it's Yamaha that's going to make that sound system. Bass speakers moving from 6 up to 8, and the upgraded system, used to be the Bose 9 speaker, is now the Yamaha 12. You'll find the other speaker grill down here, and obviously a few other places throughout the cabin. Moving over to the infotainment screen, this is going to be a 12.3 inch unit, and it is updated from last year's model. We have a single dial instead of 2. No longer left and right, just there on the center. But one thing that's interesting about this screen is that even though it's utilizing a lot of Google interface, what it's not utilizing is Google Maps. So if we click here on navigation, the maps are going to look a little bit different because they are provided by TomTom or supported by TomTom. But as you can see, that little pin right there looks a whole lot like the Google Maps icon to me. So an interesting mix of navigation providers, and honestly I think I'd prefer if we just went Google Maps, but if you're using Android Auto or Apple CarPlay, you get to choose whichever map provider that you would like to. With the addition and honestly the highlighting of the Yamaha partnership here, it makes sense that you can go into this interface and make quite a few changes to your music settings. But getting into the sound settings is a little bit clunky. So we've clicked on music. I can then go up here to my settings, scroll all the way down to audio settings, then from here into sound, and then I can start making some changes to this system. But one thing that I find incredibly cool is that there are 3 technologies that I've heard only of one of them, and that's going to be down here at the bottom. Your speed compensated volume seems pretty standard. It's when the car gets louder, assuming that it's going faster, then so too does the sound volume turn up. But now Yamaha's worked in a rain compensated volume and an AC compensated volume. And unfortunately, I haven't really had a chance to test that out here, but basically it's tuning itself to those different sounds. Obviously there's different pitches, and that's going to cancel out different sounds from the stereo. So hopefully this system works really, really well in all of these conditions, but a fun one that I have not seen. Speed, yes, the others, no. Beyond that, most of these functions are what you would expect, although I will admit that this interface here, basically your apps and cycling through things, is not the most simplistic to use. And for someone who's in and out of vehicles as often as I am, it still took me a while to find some of these settings that ultimately I wanted. But I digress. The screen is nice and big, clearly visible, and very much in line with what we got on the previous model as far as its functionality. Now, moving beyond that, your controls are going to remain mostly manual. So that means down here we have buttons, knobs, and switches. But we also have the addition, as I'm utilizing right now, of a ventilated seat here in the top end trims. They have been perforated before, but not ventilated. That feature is now here, and hopefully one to stay. Just below that, though, we have another change, and that's going to come in the form of the phone charging tray. Now, wireless connectivity means that you should have wireless charging, but this tray has been redesigned and it's at an angle. So not only is it a little bit rubbery and sticky, but it's at an angle. It's not my favorite design, but I think it's quickly become my second favorite. The vertical slot design takes up the least amount of space, but this one means that my phone is not going to be sliding anywhere, and it's really not taking up any more space than it absolutely has to. Now, I mentioned the new software for your sound adaptation. What I also haven't seen before is such attention to pay to detail on cup holders, and this feels like a very US market thing. These cup holders are supposed to be able to hold 2 44-ounce drinks together, and that's because they are pitched at a different angle. So drink 1 goes in here, pitched slightly forward, drink 2 goes back here, pitched slightly backwards. And that means we can fit the big gulps and 2 of them, so everyone in the car feels like they're included in enjoying their favorite beverage. Parking brake here, auto hold as well. Don't worry, I'll circle back there for the controls. But in here, we also got a little bit more storage capacity. Now, this was one of the complaints from customers, is that there's just not a lot of room in here. They increased it by apparently about 45%. I haven't brought items to fill that with, but more storage is a good thing, and a USB-C port right there as well. Now, these controls stay the same. A nice low profile controller here for your park, reverse, neutral, drive, and M instead of B because this does have a manual mode, even though it is a CVT. And this dial is going to be the same as it always was with some unusual settings. I say unusual settings and I don't mean it in a bad way, but if I slide this over, the first thing you'll see is eco, and that makes sense. Between eco and normal, you can make some assumptions about what's happening. But if you want the sport mode, you don't slide it over to sport mode because that doesn't exist. Instead, you would slide it over to tarmac. So just something to know is that sport mode is actually tarmac, and it'll ask the vehicle, the CVT, to treat itself more like an 8-speed transmission, which is a little bit unusual to me, but I recognize there are folks who don't like that CVT sound or feel. But just remember, it is always a little bit faster to let the CVT do its thing instead of pretend to be something different. Now, beyond that, we also have gravel, snow, and mud. Hopefully you don't get stuck in either of those, but if you do, there is a mode for it. Aside from those driving modes, this is a equal 12.3-inch digital driver display, and there are a few things you can change throughout here. You can cycle through a number of different screens, as you can see there in the top, your home, information, vehicle, navigation. That is assuming you're using the vehicle's navigation. I was not able in the short time I was here to get my Android Auto displayed up there. But the point is we have these and we can control them and change them in the way that ends up working best. It is a nice crisp display, and I appreciate that it does match the others so that we have at least equal screen time. Now, moving on to the steering wheel, very similar design, but nice and easy. You have good grips here, but we also do have those paddle shifters, and that's because this can pretend and does pretend to be a real 8-speed transmission, even though ultimately I don't think it has to. That's okay, individual drivers do. Without getting too personal, I'll slide down here with a bit of a feet pick, and that's because we also get the addition of aluminum pedals. And that's gonna be on most of these trims, just a small touch to make everything in here feel a little bit more premium. Along with some of our other lighting upgrades, we also got LED interior lighting, and we still got to keep the enormous sunroof here. I'll go ahead and slide that shade back, so that if you do need a little bit more light and there's any outside, you'll definitely be able to bring that in here with you. But if you don't want to bring all of it with you, or your passengers don't want to deal with it, again, here on those top end trims, we do still have the manual sunshade. So there in the back, you can go ahead and cover yourself up just a little bit. And for those who get stuck in the back, at least the second row that is, don't worry, not all is lost. You too get your own Yamaha adorned speaker grills there in the top and bottom of the door. And in this higher end trim, you do get 3 zones of climate control and heated outboard seating. Time for me to crawl into that third row and show that it does technically fit a human being. Now, first step here was to slide this second row seat all the way forward. This whole second row is on rails, sliding forward and backwards, and that's gonna be important so that I have room for my legs. Tilt this seat forward, slide it forward, hoist oneself in. As you may be aware, I'm not the smallest human being out there. And just like that, I am now in the back seat. But I'm not just leaning forward for fun. It's because I really don't fit back here, at least in the headroom. If I go all the way back, you can see how many inches short I am, which is going to be many. But I can technically fit back here, and if I lean forward, that's okay. And honestly, there isn't going to be a comfortable way to lean back because my legs are so close to myself anyway that leaning forward probably makes the most sense. Now, to actually make sure I fit, I do have my foot under this seat here. We'll fold this back up, and I'll probably pretty much disappear. Obviously, I will have another leg out so that I can breathe. But the only thing I'm really missing back here for this to be a little bit more comfortable is some air. And unfortunately, it's a little bit stuffy today, but good news, I'm not here for long and I'll survive. It's also a little bit easier if this seat stays totally vertical, which it can do. But if this person complains about being uncomfortable, then they can go ahead and switch places with me anytime they want. If this tilts a little bit farther back, I'm pretty much out of leg room, but in a pinch, I could certainly make this work. The only thing I'm missing back here, like I said, some air vents, but I also have no USB-C charging. So if I needed to, I'd have to run a cable all the way through. But I do have cup holders, just obviously not as large or probably engineered as the ones we get there in the front. Out on the road, the strengths and weaknesses here in the Outlander are going to be prevalent pretty quickly. And one of those weaknesses is going to be off the line. And that's because we see the same 2.5-liter engine that we've seen over the last few years, putting out the same 181 horsepower, but we see an increase in weight, essentially year over year. But in this case, I think it's gone the right direction because some of this increase in weight is due to increased rigidity and sound deadening material to coincide with the new Yamaha sound system. I haven't seen, and I'm not saying it doesn't exist, but especially at this price point, I haven't seen such a commitment in some of the structural changes in the vehicle just to accommodate a new stereo. But it seems like a lot of that work went in, and if I was going to make a vehicle heavier, for a sound system, it would be one of the reasons I do that. And it's a pretty good sound system. I've heard better, but at much, much higher prices. So good on them, and hopefully it's a lucrative collaboration. Yamaha will also produce the sound system in the base models, just obviously not quite as punchy. I will say one other thing I don't like about this powertrain has to do not with the engine, but the transmission. And it's not because it's a CVT, it's because it's not really allowed to act like a CVT. In so many cases, this wants to act like an 8-speed transmission, and that's not what it's going to be good at, because that's not what it is. So if I could snap my fingers and change something there, I'd make it a CVT. It'd be a little bit louder, and it's not the most refined engine, but the point here is that I'm not getting anything more because of these simulated 8 speeds, and I could also probably do without the paddle shifters. But with the paddle shifters, you would generally assume a sporty drive, and this is actually pretty good. And we're on a pretty rough road right now, hitting some potholes, and it handles it well. And there are also few vehicles that can handle potholes and twisty corners with equal eagerness. Here on these back roads, we don't just have broken pavement, but we also have tight, twisty turns. And even though we don't have a ton of power to accelerate us into these turns, what we do have is pretty good levels of grip and balance. And a lot of that's going to be due to the all-wheel drive system here, which is very good at enhancing the driving experience, as well as being equally good in tougher traction situations. For me, it all comes down to the vehicle meeting the need. And if I was shopping for something like this, I'll admit sportiness would not be top of my list. So I don't mind that we're a little underpowered. I also don't mind that this is a big boxy vehicle, because what I want is practicality. And a third row, or 2.5 rows, is certainly going to give me more flexibility than something that's got a nice steep raked roofline there in the back, which would be sexier, but that's not really the point here. Beyond that, I mostly want to make sure that I'm comfortable in the vehicle that I'm spending significant time in, and this is going to do that. These seats are great. I love the way that we have different interiors available, especially at this price point. And you can get a fully loaded, that's the top tier platinum version that has some of those exclusive pieces, for under the price of the average new vehicle. And you're getting so much car for that. Car, function, practicality. It's a premium experience without a premium price tag. And I don't necessarily want to call it a full-on premium product, because it is missing some of those things that would really take it to that level. But the experience feels really good for the dollar, and that's something I can always get behind. One of the most attractive things about the Outlander has been its pricing, and in 2025, that's definitely still the case. But I'll admit I have some notes, because there are a lot of ways to order said Outlander. While reviewing everything on my flight home, I realized I overcomplicated things just a bit. This Outlander starts under $30,000, assuming you don't factor in that destination, but we always like to if we can, which really means it's going to start out at $31,140. That's going to be for the two-wheel drive model. It's two-wheel drive across the line, except for the Platinum, but we'll get there at the very end. If you want all-wheel drive, it's going to be $1,800 across the lineup. The next step up is going to be the SE, but really if you want some of those new features like Yamaha's ultimate 12-speaker system, that means you have to get the tech package on top of the SE, and that's going to start at $37,090. Again, plus $1,800 if you want all-wheel drive. After the SE is going to come the Trail Edition, but we didn't get any more information on it. It does seem to be built off of the SE, but with the quick look we got, it's going to come somewhere between the pricing of SE and SEL, mostly SE with some unique features. Mostly it seems like it's going to be cosmetic, but it was a pretty good look. So for folks who want a more rugged appearance, that's going to be the way to do it with the Outlander. We just don't know any more about when or if that'll come out in the near future. Above that is the SEL, which is definitely going to get you some more niceties, things with that quilted interior I'm such a fan of. But if you want some more of the new features that are highlighted in 2025, like that upgraded 12-speaker Yamaha sound system, the digital rearview mirror, and if you're a big fan of that new brick interior, the only way to get that is going to be with a $3,000 package on top of that they call Premium, which is what we were driving there in the video. At the very top, we have our Platinum trim. It comes in one way, fully loaded, everything included. That means all-wheel drive as well, and that's still under $45,000, but just barely $44,640. No matter how you put it, there is a good way to get your Outlander, and its value has been one of the reasons this does as well as it does, because it's a very competitive segment. But honestly, I think this is my favorite two-row vehicle, and I say two-row because obviously it is not traditionally two-row, but it's as compact as many of them, or just a little bit over, and still gives you that reserve option. And even if you're not using that third rows of seating, it still gives you tons of storage capability. And I generally like the way it looks. I also appreciate where the money went, because while this is a slightly underwhelming powertrain, it is a very comfortable ride, and it handles nicely as well. And when you're inside, it feels like a premium experience, even if it isn't a wholly premium product. But if you have to make a sacrifice, then I think I'd rather sacrifice the performance on an SUV than the ride, comfort, sound system. Those are all things that I think were good money spent. So let me know down in the comments if you think this is a worthwhile upgrade from a 2024, or maybe you have something like a 2022, even though it is the same engine, or if you would have to see some pretty significant changes to an Outlander to consider it for your next vehicle. Thanks so much for watching. See you down the road.